Pahalgam has been mentioned, Vishnu, is the first big takeaway from this statement.
No, there's another line.
Yeah.
They further stated that perpetrators, organizers and sponsors of such attacks must be brought to justice.
In the presence of Shehbaz Sharif, by the way.
And by the way, pretty much echoing what the Prime Minister of India said earlier of hypocrisy being intolerable. They've said the member states, while reaffirming their firm commitment to the fight against terrorism, separatism and extremism, stress the inadmissibility of attempts to use terrorist, separatist and extremist groups for mercenary purposes. They recognize the leading role of sovereign states and their competent authorities in countering terrorist and extremist threats. The member states strongly condemn terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and stress that double standards in the fight against terrorism are unacceptable. The member states call on international community to combat terrorism, including cross-border movement of terrorists. And of course, India's initiatives have been recognized. But there can be no double standards. You cannot deal with the same people who are patrons and purveyors of terrorism. These 4-5 points, Vishnu and Shiv, are extremely significant. Not only has Pahalgam been explicitly named, and remember, this is something that you heard right at the outset, right here on NDTV. At the time when we had this brought up in the meeting between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, then what the Prime Minister of India said in his morning address, where he said that we cannot have people being allowed to get away by being patrons of terror. Double standards were called out, and now Pahalgam named.
Do we have Ambassador Ashraf with us still?
This is
a quick. Okay, we don't have.
We don't have Ambassador Ashraf, but this is a six-front splash as far as Indian foreign policy is concerned. I don't think this was something that anyone expected. We did expect that terror would be reflected in this Tianjin declaration, but for Pahalgam to be mentioned explicitly, the date of the terror attack, the joint declaration as far as strongly condemning Pahalgam, that the attack sponsors need to be brought to justice is, I'm going to go ahead and say it, there is no grey area here. We've been talking about grey areas all morning. This is black and white in the Tianjin declaration, Padmaja and Vishnu, as far as India's stand is concerned. The Prime Minister made it clear that this was an issue on which India is going to be unwavering. It is going to be non-negotiable as far as India's concerns are on the table. They've been articulated to Xi Jinping. The Prime Minister's statement, which we have also mentioned it clearly, that was the overriding theme. And here you've got the SCO statement. Can there be, Vishnu and Padmaja, can there be a greater reflection of this new alignment than the fact that this reflects in the statement?
I just want to make a couple of points over here. Firstly, on the statement and the weight of the statement itself. This comes as, these are highlights in the Tianjin Declaration. This is as strong a statement against terrorism as we've seen in any international fora. The fact that it names Pahalgam directly, fulfills in a sense India's fight for justice. But there is so much more in the statement which quite clearly indicates, and this is a snub on Pakistan in a way in which, like never before. Mention of Pahalgam. Secondly, SCO members further stated that perpetrators, organizers and sponsors of such attacks must be brought to justice. This is a call on Pakistan to bring those responsible to justice, because there's no ambiguity on where Pahalgam came from, where it originated.
And look how illustrative these images are that are playing right now as we
timed it perfectly.
As we break this news here on NDTV first, Vishnu and Padmaja. It's incredible because it's pretty much depicting what happened. Pakistan's concerns, and I'm sure they must have had some form of objection unless China separately took them on board before this declaration was made, has been completely made irrelevant. They've been made redundant as far as this declaration is concerned. And as Ambassador Ashraf was telling us, in the context of what's happening between the two hemispheres right now, the SCO, we can't compare it with the NATO, etc., but the SCO is very important. For a Tianjin declaration to take place right now, explicitly mention Pahalgam, explicitly mention an alignment on terror, and importantly talk about bringing the perpetrators of justice to terror in the presence of Shehbaz Sharif, in my view, it doesn't get bigger than this. This is possibly the best possible outcome, Vishnu.
And And also, if I may add, a message to America as well, because here it's addressed not just to people in the room and to Pakistan, but when they say that you cannot have double standards. We had Ambassador Ashraf earlier saying that America has been pretty transactional when it comes to Pakistan and their concerns vis-a-vis terrorism. When it suits them, they say, well, bad guy Pakistan. When it suits them, they're like great ally Pakistan. But that hypocrisy also is being called out here, saying, listen, it cannot be according to your convenience, and the international community is called upon by the SCO to fight this menace together. This is an international problem.
That Padmaja mentions, when you had the US Central Commander, Central Army, the Central Commander in this region actually say that, you know, Pakistan has been of great assistance to us in the fight against ISIS-K. That's great.
An awesome partner.
An awesome partner. But what about awesomeness when it comes to your biggest or one of your biggest strategic partners, India, and the fact that we've had this nightmarish situation in Pahalgam? I think there's another part of the statement which is equally important. The member states reaffirm their fight, their commitment to the fight against terrorism, separatism, extremism, and stress the inadmissibility of attempts to use terrorist, separatist, and extremist groups for mercenary purposes. They recognize the leading role of sovereign states and their competent authorities in countering terrorist and extremist threats. What does this mean? This means that what India has done in fighting terrorism, in whichever way that we have done it, is something which is justified, right? And there is pressure on states who are state sponsors of terrorism to ensure that those people on their territory who actually do that are brought to justice.
You know, Vishnu and Padmaja,
but we all know who's done it in Pakistan, as if it's not as if we can actually explain.
On NDTV, we never overstate things, but I am going to go out on a limb and say, you know, maybe we've underestimated the level of alignment that's happening at the SCO.
Yeah,
you know, I personally, you know, you guys, I don't know what you guys think, but I didn't expect Pahalgam to be mentioned in this joint declaration.
I thought it would be a strong statement
and
on terrorism.
Since morning, all our guests have been, you know, advising caution, saying, look, it's not just about what's in the joint statement. We've said our piece. We've made our stand clear.
Exactly.
But look, here it is.
Yeah.
Not just terrorism, but Pahalgam by name. We were wondering about, you know, whether anyone's going to name Pakistan, but this is, nothing is left to the imagination. Everyone knows who is behind Pahalgam. India has named Pakistan very clearly earlier as well. So it's a clear message in black and white, as strident and strong as it can get.
The foreign office couldn't be happier about this.
There's a win over here at the SCO. There's a win with China. We have to be careful. No one is taking away from the nature of the threat that we faced in the past, but there is progress in that relationship. And I would presume there'd be progress in the relationship with Russia as well, because there is that meeting with President Putin, which is expected next. That's what we have told right now.
Guys, is there a catch in the statement anywhere? Vishnu and Padmaja are pouring through that statement. The skeptic in me is wondering whether there's an Easter egg somewhere buried in there, because this is almost too good to be true as far as India's concerns are, have to do on the table. The fact is, Pahalgam being mentioned, bringing the perpetrators being mentioned, double standards being mentioned, those who've taken different stances in the past on terror are concerned. There is a very, very strong message, as Padmaja rightly said, to the United States in this. There is a very strong message here to, to the European Union as well, which has prevaricated on Pakistani terror. But you've got China, which is Pakistan's main sponsor state, being part of this joint declaration, and that makes this perhaps the biggest multilateral statement in recent memory. Certainly in the last decade, China has its own contradictions and hypocrisies when it comes to terror, but China, the host
there's another message for
of
America,
the SCO being part of this declaration, mentioning Pahalgam and mentioning the perpetrators of terror in the presence of Shehbaz Sharif, is 100 on 100 as far as Indian foreign policy is concerned.
There's something else which America would be concerned about buried inside this statement. I quote, the member states reaffirm the universality, indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness of all human rights, as well as their commitment to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, and oppose the application of double standards in human rights issues and interference in the internal affairs of other states under the pretext of protecting them.
That's for Marco Rubio, I think.
So there is that annual statement which comes out on religious freedoms in India, etc., etc. right? It's like, stay away.
Yeah.
You know, we will deal with whatever we have to, and that's what New Delhi has said all along.
And this is a very obvious alignment for China, Russia, and India.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to these reports that come out from either the Pentagon or the State Department, as far as democratic institutions, protests, religious freedom, press freedom. These are annual irritations that come in. So it's interesting, Vishnu, that you should point out that that's been given place in this statement as well.
Also, the central role of the United Nations by fully implementing, I'm talking about terrorism, by fully implementing the relevant UN Security Resolution and the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy in accordance with the UN Charter of the Principles of International Law in order to jointly combat all terrorist organizations.
Let's bring Aditya in.
China is talking about the United Nations
Yeah.
and a global counterterrorism strategy. That's important because they've opposed us in the past in the United Nations on terrorism. Aditya, go ahead with your thoughts.
Aditya, this couldn't be a bigger headline. Pahalgam, you know, just a few hours after that question you put to the Indian Foreign Secretary, we have a confirmation now that the declaration actually mentions Pahalgam. There couldn't be a bigger outcome.
Shiv, nobody had expected this. You know, in the last 24 hours, we've been talking to a lot of diplomats, but they were mummed. But it seems that there was a lot of diplomacy that was underway behind closed doors. India was very much, pushing the agenda against terrorism. India was pushing the exact terminology. And this is a game changer, really, in the relationship between India and China, because these are far-reaching consequences as well. This also comes at a time, the condemnation of cross-border terrorism and Pahalgam, when this morning at 5:30 a.m. there's been an attempt by Pakistan at cross-border terrorism, at infiltration in Jammu and Kashmir. The White Knight Corps has put out the details of the same. So the Pakistani terrorism continues. And this is also not just a major diplomatic victory for India, and perhaps when it comes to Pakistan, India's diplomatic coup, but it is an embarrassment for Pakistan. Imagine, Pakistan calls China an iron brother. Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, along with a huge delegation, arrives here in Tianjin, China, but they have to face this wrath of the statement of the declaration, which clearly condemns terrorism, but gives a very detailed answer to how terrorism needs to be condemned, how countries need to stand against terrorism in all its manifestations and forms, names the Pahalgam terror attack. And everybody in the world knows that the Pahalgam terror attack was the game plan of Asim Munir and the Pakistan army. It was a conspiracy of the Pakistani deep state, and that was followed by Operation Sindhu. So it's a massive embarrassment coming in for Pakistan. I don't know how Shehbaz Sharif or his entire entourage will really, go through this or bring in some kind of a justification, because, earlier there were some claims being made that if there is condemnation of Pahalgam attack, perhaps the Jafar Express attack in Balochistan might also be mentioned. But now Pahalgam has been mentioned, the most brutal terror attack in recent times that has happened on the face of the earth. And the SCO is behind India on this. So that's clearly a game changer when it comes to also
and absolutely no balancing act, no Jafar Express attack mentioned, and more importantly, the distinction being made that it's a responsibility not just of the SCO grouping, Aditya, but every sovereign state, their entire apparatus. It is incumbent on them to ensure that the scourge of terrorism, so making that distinction that yes, you'll have that odd rogue state, but if you are a sovereign state, it is your duty to ensure that this particular issue is addressed.
That's right. Perpetrators need to be brought to justice. As simple and as hard-hitting as it gets. Certainly, earlier statements, if you go through the SCO statements or the BRICS statements, there is a minor mention of terrorism. There's a minor mention of condemnation for terrorism. But this is perhaps for the first time that a 6-pointer detailed explanation and condemnation of terrorism has come in. And that's only at the request of India. India has been pushing its measures against terrorism, particularly in the context of Pakistan-sponsored terror. Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, world's biggest terror organizations getting safe shelter and, of course, safe haven in Pakistan. Embarrassing for Pakistan, but are they, completely, against it? They are certainly not going to react in this manner. But certainly, Pakistan is used to it. Pakistan is used to global embarrassments. I mean, just like Shiv was pointing out this visual that was coming on the screen of Shehbaz Sharif, standing alone at the SCO platform and nobody even going to him for shaking a hand. And at the same time, Putin and Modi coming in. So it's a huge statement coming in. It has far-reaching diplomatic consequences. It is a major diplomatic victory for Indian diplomats who ensured that the right kind of terminology happened. Because I would remind you, Shiv, Padmaja, and Vishnu, that during a couple of weeks ago when Rajnath Singh was in China, there was a huge issue when Rajnath Singh actually refused to sign that declaration. Pahalgam was not mentioned, but Prime Minister Modi's diplomats and Indian diplomats ensuring that the right definition, the right terminology is there. There's global condemnation at the SCO platform for terrorism. Pahalgam is mentioned. It's a big, major victory for India.
China hasn't stopped it. In the United Nations, China has come and stopped the naming of terrorists, terrorists specifically, on a global list. China could have vetoed this in some way, shape or form, influenced the final outcome, watered it down. They've done nothing of the sort. I think that's another big win in terms of India-China.
Exactly. As I said diplomatically, Vishnu, and you've been covering it for years together, this kind of a, shift, this kind of a policy shift from China is, remarkable. It's a paradigm shift when it comes to policy. Of course, the trust deficit remains. This does not mean that everything goes back to normalcy. But this will have, as a result, changes in the kind of negotiations we will have, particularly on terrorism, particularly on security cooperation, particularly condemning cross-border terrorism. So China has made a major shift as well. China has also been on the brunt of, this kind of activities in Balochistan. There are a lot of Chinese engineers, etc., who have been killed. They've been upset with Pakistan because Pakistan hasn't been able to provide the right kind of security for the Chinese engineers and educators, etc., in Balochistan, Karachi, and other places. So they know the reality. They know how the terror functions. And this has been a huge irritant over the last many years because last time I was here in China was for the BRICS summit. At that time also, there was condemnation of Jaish-e-Mohammed, but nothing substantial really came out of the summit. So this is for the first time that a major statement comes from the SCO level condemning terrorism. China stands with India. Yesterday when Vikram Misri said that there was positive understanding from the Chinese side, perhaps we should have got a cue that Chinese are on board with India when it comes to countering terrorism, and there will be a strong statement, and that is what India has achieved.